I was reading this one I'm showing people. It says, woman missing since 2020, found living in a tent in Utah, eating moss and grass. Law enforcement had to admit that she actually wasn't doing anything wrong. But basically, this woman just walked off from society, left her car behind, pitched a tent, started drinking water out of the river, eating moss. She might actually be smarter than the other 99% of people there. It looks like she's ahead of the game, almost.
Not almost. Imagine the skills she knows in wild foraging. The smoke is clearing. The fog seems to be burning off at the moment where it's so clear to see. You see, leaders are riding on top of the natural cycle of change anyway, where the fog is lifted to almost every individual on this planet is seeing the fiction in front of them. But now they're going to reframe it as the Great Reset. We need to change this. Suddenly they care. For 400 years of burning people at the stake, and they suddenly care. I mean, it makes no sense any longer. Except the frequency field's changing. And if they can distract you long enough.
We're distracted from birth, it seems. I think that's why they always want to go after children with education. You know, the farming thing, every time I go out to my garden, I'm sitting there thinking, you know, why how come when I went to kindergarten, they didn't teach me genetics and all of that stuff that goes along with learning plants? Like, so I'm sitting out there at nighttime and I'm talking to my son about, you know, what this is for and what that's for. And we're looking at all these little bugs that are coming up. And I was telling him, you know, how you make hybrids. Like, we got this kind of squash and that kind of squash and this kind of squash over there. But there's really no telling what kind of squash we're going to get by the end of the year, because the bees and everything are, you know, going back and forth between them, hybridizing things. And you would think that that would be this place in kindergarten to teach people how to feed themselves, and at the same time introduce them to big ideas when they're only 5 or 6 years old, like genetics and all of those other sciences, you know, that you would need to just survive on your own. That's what you should be learning in kindergarten. By the time you're in 6th grade, you should be learning how to deal with economics and how to purchase land for yourself so you could grow said food. But that's a reality we just don't live in. But I think that we could make that reality. It's like you were saying, the power of no. You also have the power of leading by example. And I think that sooner or later, people are going to get why all the corporations are busy buying up all the farmland, and everybody that has land is trying to farm it. It's not a joke. And in my opinion, like I said, there's going to be a big population reduction just on a natural course. And then you got to add all of this other stuff in. And it seems like it was just too perfectly in line in timing. You know, our economy, population, the idea of all of these genetic revelations, you might want to call it, at the same time as going into a natural period where we may or may not have some bad times ahead if we're not careful, or depending on where you live.
Let's step back into kindergarten for a second. They gave us a teaser. They gave you magnets in kindergarten. Do you remember magnets, and you used to play with them on the table and get in trouble for making sounds when teachers were talking? Nobody gets in trouble anymore, but back in the day when you would get in trouble for distracting a class. Remember when they had magnets and they gave them to you and you pushed them and you had fun, and one little one pushed the other one away and you could like scrape it down, make it move down the table and everything. That was the freedom to electricity, because magnetic motors, not electrogravitics, something completely different, but magnetic motors were right at your cusp. Think about taking that child's fascination with a magnetic field, pushing a magnet and bouncing it across the desk as it repelled, and then scaled that up with neodymium magnets. And then all these kids would have invented these magnetic motors that created electricity by two magnetic fields pushing, again, the same thing, opposite rotating disks. Why would Tesla on that with the electrogravitics and free energy, floating fields off weightlessness, but at the same time, when you use magnets to spin opposite disks, you can create electricity off of that. So what is it about these magnets? That's this whole thing about opposite rotational disk creates electricity. Can you imagine implanting that into school children at the age of kindergarten and saying, develop a motor that runs on these magnets?
I think that it's probably been done millions of times already. And like I was saying earlier, with disruptive technology, anytime anybody makes a breakthrough that obviously will make humans more free in some way, you will get the midnight knock. And I think that goes way back. And I think it's not even, it's just whatever authoritarian group's in charge. Because, for example, you can go back in time 3,500 years ago. I forgot the guy's name, but there was a little steam motor, and both ends, it would blow steam out and it would sit there and spin. The guy was one gear away from the Industrial Revolution, but we waited another 3,500 years. It's almost like somebody went in there and, just made sure that nothing progressed with that. Anytime anybody comes up with something that removes other humans or entities' power from the individual, that's exactly when you meet the most force. And I think that explains exactly why you get so much grief, even from regular people, about, look, well, I'm over here preparing, I'm working, I'm creating, and say nothing ever happened. You could sit there at 90 years old looking at your orchard that's grown super giant and all of the work you've done, and just sit there and feel, what do you call that? Content, I guess, or fulfilled, I should say, knowing that you just built that. Does that really hurt your feelings to think that somebody in the future will enjoy what you built if nothing happens in your lifetime? I don't think it bothers you.
I am so grateful and so happy and so thankful and so fulfilled every day that I'm working on my land and planting anything that's going to bring something for me to eat or bring happiness to somebody else who's going to go, wow, I can't believe you made that. You grew this salad that we're eating tonight. Wow, that's amazing. I'm going off on a little rant here, but Gainura, speaking of superfoods, I'm going to list a couple superfoods here that are pretty easy to grow. So one of these I have right now, and you hit me on the genetics here. So I have this thing called Gainura, which is an Indian superfood. It's an Indian Malabar spinach, which has incredible contents of vitamins, minerals. It's super off the chart, way right up at the very top with spirulina algae, but in a vegetable leaf plant form. And you don't need to powderize it. You can cut it at the stem and then cook it fresh. It's called Gainura, Gynura. Now spell it again, Gynura. Now I have a bunch of Gainura out there, and they're all coming to seed right now. And it's what's interesting is they're all coming to a very tight, compact yellow seed. So what I'm going to do is wait for all of them to go to seed, and then I'm going to choose the tallest, healthiest, girthiest, strongest one and collect those seeds. And the other seeds, I'll still keep them, but the ones I'm going to pinpoint to try to replant in the greenhouse are going to be the ones with the strongest, like the bodybuilder type, like girthiest leaves and the strongest growing, largest plant, because we planted all these at the same time. And they're super incredible easy. I mean, this is one of the easiest plants ever to grow, ever. All you have to do is when it comes out into a larger plant, cut a stem off of it, and it's pretty supple. It's like really thick basil. Stick it in the ground, and it'll grow another one. I want entire fields of this stuff. This is superfood beyond superfood. In the Vedic texts, they talk about this as some sort of extract that grams of this could keep you alive during famine. That's how powerful this is, that it comes from Indian Vedic text. Now, this is something you want to grow in your garden that's available. You can order it online. You can get the starters, just plop them in a tray, a bowl, anything you can put it into, pot, plant it in your garden, because this thing spreads pretty well and it grows incredibly. It likes full sun, but it is the easiest plant ever. If you want to start with something where you're not going to make a lot of mistakes, like windsap apples is a good one if you're going to put an orchard out, because windsap's pretty much 100% here, at least in East Tennessee. You put windsap apples out, bam, you're going to get a harvest off them. And if I'm going to ramble for a second, Moringa oleifera, Moringa. Now, this is more of a greenhouse thing in Tennessee because it gets too cold in the winter, because it will kill the root in the winter. It gets too cold up here. But if you're down in Florida, southern Texas, bordering Mexico, except maybe for this year, it got too cold. It would have killed the roots. I mean, there's some super freezes down for super deep this year in the southern parts. So are we at the cusp of the changes where we're really coming into the grand solar minimum, where a lot of agriculture will be lost, where we're going to need to move an enormous amount of your superfoods into greenhouses? Because think about the food shortages. What are you really short on in a food short? You're short on the vitamins and the minerals and the micronutrients. That's what's keeping your body functioning. Those
Yeah.
different nucleic acids running around your body. That's what you're lacking. Spirulina algae, that's super easy to buy. Now, if you had Moringa oleifera and you had Gynora spirulina algae, I mean, you could live pretty much just eating powdered plant all the time with some protein mixed in.
Now, are you talking, is there any specific one you're talking about? Because I was showing on screen here, there's like, I don't know, 20 or 30 different ones. It says Hong Fing Kai from Taiwan. It's Kinji So in Japan, or Okinawa spinach. I mean, like there's like 20 different kinds. The one they're showing is like purple, green, and with little yellow flower or orange flowers.
Yeah, there's different types. So the main ones you're going to get are the very dense purplish ones that have the purple fibers coming on. I found that really incredibly difficult to grow. I mean, we grew it, but it grew slow and it was easy to overwater and it would just start rotting. So the ones that are purple are the most difficult. But when you come, there's a couple other varieties. There's more of a darker green, and then you get into the really light green. So the darker green varieties and the really incredibly vibrant, like super almost optic green, light green ones, those are like weeds. You literally plant them in, and they're all from the same family of Gynora. I personally go into the middle range of the darker green because it's got a lot of things as you think super dark. So think about kales, and you think about algae, and that kind of denseness of the greens inside there. Mustard leaf. You know, any kind of these dense greens that have an enormous amount of vitamin C and then different micronutrients and microminerals inside there. That's what that Gynora plant represents. And Moringa, I'll say the last thing. Moringa oleifera, in Chinese, it's called La Mu, which means spicy tree. It is true. If you take off the leaves, it is incredibly bitter. Not bitter, but it's spicy, a little bit sweet to the taste, but it's more like, let's say Japanese wasabi mixed with sugar if you eat it straight off the tree. But as soon as you stir fry it, that spiciness bite goes away and it turns to 100%. I wouldn't say sugar, but it's very, very light, sugary, like a sugar snap pea.
Yeah.
It changes state after you stir fry it. It takes that bitter wasabi out of it. If you can grow any of these and you have a way to make people healthy through diet, and if people are getting sick from scurvy and all these kind of things because they're not eating the right food because they're eating canned food for year after year, and that's all they're surviving on is restorable foods with no fresh vegetable mixed in, and you're going to bring in some of these powders that are going to be superfoods on top, almost every that they have will just instantly disappear because they're getting the micronutrients they need again. They're getting the minerals and the vitamins they need again.
I wanted to know your opinion on this, is because you know you're kind of talking about these weird stories seem to just pop out like they're being generated to send people down a certain thought process. And I was reading this one. I'm showing people. It says woman missing since 2020, found living in a tent in Utah, eating moss and grass. There is a good part of the story because law enforcement had to admit that she actually wasn't doing anything wrong. But basically, this woman just walked off from society, left her car behind, pitched a tent, started drinking water out of the river, eating moss. She might actually be smarter than the other 99% of people there. It looks like she's ahead of the game, almost.
Not almost. Imagine the skills she knows in wild foraging. How to filter water. I mean, water is the most important thing. We could go a few days more without eating, but if it comes down to it, how many out there listening understand how to take water from any source and then filter it to a drinkable state that won't get you sick with giardia or some kind of other amoebas or bacteria inside there that are going to ruin your gut and take you down to the point of death? That one account I read, it was called A Year in Hell, and it was about the Bosnian War. And there was somebody who did a full expose about all the experiences in their neighborhood and how they lived that experience for almost 2 years of being in a siege and how they survived and all the tips and tricks on what you want to do or don't want to do, how you'll be taken advantage of, how people bonded together. But one of the things they kept coming back to again and again and again and again and again, water filtration. because in the beginning, after the first 3 or 4 days, that river became unusable because everybody was using the bathroom in the river because they realized within a week that they couldn't use their toilets anymore. What'd they do? They threw everything in the river. The river became the disposal system instantly. So if you think, wow, there's this beautiful river, I'm just going to get my water out of there, and I'll be like, nah, hold on a minute. If you're anywhere near habitation and understand how water can become contaminated, and it's not from the infrastructure actually breaking down, it's more of what we as humans would naturally do. We take our excrement and we try to get rid of it out of our house.
I just thought it was bizarre that the law enforcement went out of their way to have to say, well, you know, she didn't actually break any laws by not telling anybody, leaving her phone behind and just going out and living. But it seems like there's only two paths right now. And, you know, you keep talking about people changing their vibration. It seems like people are getting smarter. It's not really smarter. It seems like they're getting more in tune with what they need to do. I could see how it could be too much for someone to take in if they have a belief system that incorporates that these authoritative sources are telling them the truth all of the time. I mean, think about the amount of fear that they produce versus the things that you have to really be afraid of that they don't mention.
But think about that. You lock somebody in a room, you can't leave your room, and all you're giving them is the programming coming through that thing called the TV.
It's even worse than that. They don't even use the TV anymore. They have a little phone device that they literally stick to their own eyes.